Welcome to the 5th bonus block for our Celebrating the States block of the month. In our quilt, this block will represent American Samoa. For this block, you will need 5 fabrics, 1 light, 2 mediums, and 2 darks. From the light fabric, cut 4 squares that are 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches and 16 squares that are 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. From both the mediums and both of the darks, cut 1 square that's 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches and 4 squares that are 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. Once everything is cut, it's time to start sewing. Please use 1/4-inch seam allowances unless directed otherwise. Start with the 4 light squares that are 5.5 inches by 5.5 inches. Match each of those up with a 5.5-inch square medium or dark fabric. Now you can either draw a line from corner to corner on the wrong side of the light fabric and then sew on both sides of the line, or you can use diagonal seam tape to get the same effect. Once you've sewn on both sides of the diagonal line, then you want to cut on the line, and you should get 2 half-square triangle blocks from each of these units. For our block, we'll only use 1 of each set of fabrics, but then you'll have leftovers to use in a future project. And yes, I should be using a bigger scissors for this job. Before we head to the ironing board, we're going to sew the units using the 2.5-inch squares. Match each of the light squares with a medium or dark square. We're going to sew these the same way that we sewed the big squares. You can either draw a line corner to corner on the wrong side of all the light fabrics and then sew a 1/4 inch away on both sides of the line, or you can use a diagonal seam tape to help you get the same effect. Make sure to cut them apart and then cut between the 2 sewing lines to get 2 half-square triangle blocks from each of these units. And the good thing is, I finally found my big scissors. Once they're all cut, it's time to head to the ironing board. We're going to press away from the light fabric. When pressing half-square triangle blocks like this, I like to put the light fabric facing the ironing board so that when I pick up the unit, I'm already going to be pressing towards the dark fabric or away from the light. Now that everything is pressed, it's time to trim them to size. The large half-square triangle blocks need to measure 5 inches by 5 inches. The block lock ruler helps make the trimming easy because you get both triangles to be the same size. This is the method I use to make half square triangles, but if you have a different method for making half square triangle blocks that you enjoy, by all means go ahead and make them your way. We all have our preferences, and it's all about making it easier for yourself. The small half square triangle blocks need to be trimmed to measure 2 inches by 2 inches. Once all our squares are trimmed, it's time to head to the sewing machine. Sort all of your pieces so they match up. Set aside your large half square triangle blocks for another project. And then when you have your block put together, you'll also end up with one extra small half square triangle block. Lay out each of the corners of the block one color at a time, and then sew 4 together on one side and 3 together on the bottom, and then before you put the block together, we'll have to press. The unit that has the 3 half square triangle blocks sewn together will measure 5 inches, and the 4 half square triangle blocks put together will measure 6.5 inches. I found it easiest to press these from the wrong side. Next, we're going to sew the set of 3 to the larger block, and then we'll sew the set of 4 to that unit. As you're sewing these together, always remember that the darker fabrics should be touching each other. Press towards the larger half square triangle block. I'm going to flip this first seam so that it nests at the corner, but then all the rest of the seams will be laying nice and flat to sew over. You will always be sewing on either the medium or dark fabrics. I recommend pressing this seam flat first and then pressing that seam towards the larger half square triangle block unit. Once pressed, each of these squares should measure 6.5 inches by 6.5 inches. I know how I wanted the layout for this particular block to end up at, but the fun thing about this block was there are a variety of ways that you could rearrange these 4 pieces to get a different look. I had a little fun just playing around with it, rearranging the pieces just to see what kind of different looks I could get. This block would make a fantastic scrappy quilt, especially if you use a variety of colors and backgrounds. Piece the 2 halves so you kind of get a pinwheel in the center, and then once you have those put together, you can finger press and then make the final seam. Once pressed, the finished size of this block should be 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Press the final seam to one side, or you could press the final seam open, and you're done. Make sure to give us a thumbs up if you like the video, share with your quilting friends, leave us a comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and happy quilting!